Hi everybody, welcome to Fight Scene. This is my YouTube channel where I give fan analysis on upcoming events and reflect back on some previous events that have happened over the past little while. Today I want to talk a little bit about the event that actually happened last weekend at Bellator, where Rory MacDonald won the Welterweight Championship of the World. The point I want to get across in this video is that, in my opinion, Rory MacDonald is the best welterweight in MMA today. And I know that that might be a slightly controversial topic for some people, given that he is not fighting in the UFC, which is the #1 organization in the world, and that he has a number of losses on his record that might indicate to people that he isn't the best welterweight on the planet. But I think when you really take a look at who he's been fighting and how things have gone down, to me it seems pretty clear that he, from a pure skill level, that he is the most skilled fighter at 170 pounds, and he is also incredibly young. I'm not sure his exact age. I think he might be 28 years old, and so at his age as well, he's shown quite a bit of promise, taken quite a bit of damage in his early career, and I do really think, though, when you examine each one of his fights, you can make an incredibly strong case that, outside of potentially talking about Georges St-Pierre, we can consider Rory MacDonald the best welterweight on the planet. Now, I do make that distinction about Georges St-Pierre because at this point, we haven't seen him lose in a long time. He didn't lose his belt at welterweight, and he's recently come back and even won a belt at middleweight. There's a lot of unanswered questions about who would be better between Rory and George. If I was being honest, I do think that George has more experience and is probably better and would still to this day beat Rory MacDonald in a fight. The whole question is, though, is whether or not George is ever going to fight again. So when I make the statement that Rory is the best welterweight in the world, I have to say it is with the underlying assumption that Georges St-Pierre is no longer an MMA fighter, or at least no longer a welterweight. I think it's pretty unclear at this point if he will return. I think he might, but that's so unclear that I'm kind of leaving him out of this discussion. Now, the other thing I got to point out is that I do have an inherent bias. Rory MacDonald is Canadian. I happen to be Canadian. And so I just want to get that out there, that I do have a little bit of a bias towards another Canadian athlete. And I know that that influences the way that I think about this. But let's talk about it at its merit. Why is it that I think that Rory MacDonald is the best welterweight on the planet, excluding any discussion about Georges St-Pierre? Well, for starters, and it's very simple, he has a win over the current UFC welterweight champion. And let's be honest, Tyron Woodley, while he is the champion and while he is obviously an incredible fighter, hasn't shown a lot of, well, simply he hasn't shown us a lot to prove that he is the best welterweight on the planet, other than winning some fights as the champion. In my opinion, he lost the second fight to Stephen Thompson. I don't think he did anything. I think he was walked down for 5 rounds. He wasn't choosing to strike. He wasn't demonstrating octagon control. He wasn't demonstrating aggression. And I was very shocked to see that the judges had decided that fight the way that they did in that second fight of Woodley versus Thompson. In the first fight, it was obviously a draw. Now, I also know that Robbie Lawler versus Tyron Woodley was a fight that Woodley had shown his knockout power and really did beat the champion. But the thing I think that needs to be considered there is that Robbie Lawler was coming off that massive war with Rory MacDonald. And that is a fight that Rory was winning up until the fact that his nose basically fell off his face and he couldn't take it anymore. Rory then followed up his fight with a fight against Stephen Thompson, and admittedly that was quite painful to watch. As a big Rory MacDonald fan, my friend was over here, and it was just very difficult to watch because Stephen Thompson completely outpointed him. One thing that I think really affected Rory in that fight is the fact that he had come off such a damaging war with Robbie Lawler just about less than a year prior. And I think that really did affect his performance and mentality going into that fight. And one of the things that we've heard from Rory MacDonald in interviews since that fight is that he had said, you know what, he focused too much on fighting and trying to learn karate in order to fight Stephen Thompson. It's kind of similar to what we saw in McGregor versus Mayweather, in that a lot of people were saying, look, you can't, if you're Conor McGregor, just try and become a boxer and 4 months. That's not going to happen. You need to fight him your own way. That's your only chance at winning. Now, Rory did the opposite. He tried to learn as much karate as possible in order to be able to combat and deal with Stephen Thompson's karate. But Stephen Thompson had been doing karate since he was a young kid. Rory was never going to be able to match his level of karate. He really needed to stick to his own game plan. But that was really affected, in my opinion, by the fact that he had been in such a battle with Robbie Lawler, and the sheer amount of damage that his nose had taken in that fight really ended up being his downfall in the Stephen Thompson fight because he took more damage to his nose. What we're seeing from Rory MacDonald right now is an attempt for him to basically, if you've ever heard of the term tune-up fight, he's basically going to another organization, in my opinion, to get a whole bunch of tune-up fights in order to one day return to the UFC and really be seen as that top welterweight in the world. I don't know that it's going as planned, if we're being honest. If you saw that fight against Douglas Lima, it was certainly not a tune-up fight, and he did take a ton of damage. But that's only because I think people weren't really serious about how good Douglas Lima is. We've never seen him in the UFC, so it's been hard for us to really test his skill against the top-level fighters in the world. I've seen Douglas Lima live on a couple of occasions, and let me tell you, he is a very technical fighter, and I was not surprised to see him have the kind of success that he has had against Rory MacDonald. And so, while it doesn't just come out as obvious that Rory MacDonald is the best welterweight in the world, I think if you look at his resume as on the whole, you'll see that he has been more successful against top-level competition than I think anybody in the sport. Except for George St. Pierre, Tyron Woodley has not looked good in his last fights. He did beat Damian Maia, and that was impressive, but he basically did it by just being superior in one aspect of the sport. When we look at Rory MacDonald, we see a much more well-rounded fighter who was able to take Tyron Woodley down and also get creative as Tyron gets his back up against the fence. And this is why I think that Rory MacDonald in a rematch against Tyron Woodley would actually win another fight. If we look at both those fighters, are we really going to say that Rory has become less skilled since the last time they fought? Absolutely not. Now, he's taken more damage, and that has had a significant impact on his career, but he has only progressed. He's gotten even better at jiu-jitsu, and his striking has become a lot more crisp. Now, he might seem a little bit more reluctant to use that, but with the lack of aggression that Tyron Woodley has been showing recently, it doesn't give us any reason to believe that Rory wouldn't be able to implement his game plan. Tyron does sprint and have big flurries, but that's something that we've seen Rory be able to deal with. And when Tyron puts his back up against the fence, Rory has an opportunity to really get creative in his striking. And if you ever have seen a highlight reel of Rory MacDonald, you can see that he can really string together some really spectacular combos that would and have given Tyron trouble in the past. I think that Tyron would do the exact same thing. He would put his back up against the fence, he would wait for one big flurry, and he would try and knock him out. The challenge is that Rory MacDonald has shown that he has maybe the best chin, or he wears damage better than I think any fighter I can think of at this time. And I don't think that Tyron, even with his big flurry, is going to be able to knock him out. I also think that Rory, just like in the first fight, would be able to take Tyron down again and dominate him from the top position and use his superior jiu-jitsu. Tyron simply would have to completely change his entire way of fighting in order to be more successful against Rory. Rory doesn't have to do that. He basically just needs to take some time to heal up some injuries, specifically his nose and now his leg. And I think if he were to come back to the UFC and fight Tyron Woodley, we would see a fight that's very similar to the first one. And Tyron is the champ right now. The only person that poses any kind of threat at this point to Rory MacDonald is Stephen Thompson. That's the rematch that I want to see. And if I was going to rank the welterweight division at this time, George St. Pierre excluded, I would put Rory MacDonald as the #1 welterweight fighter in the world, Stephen Thompson as the second best in the world, and I know you're going to call me a Tyron hater, but I really believe that he won that second fight. And then I would obviously put Tyron third, because he is a great fighter, and he is a powerful fighter, and he does know how to win fights, even though that might be the most frustrating thing I've ever seen. Anyway, that's all I really have to say. I'm sure I'll make another video on this next time Rory has a fight coming up. I just wanted to get my opinion out there. That's why I make these videos. I enjoy talking about MMA. I enjoy discussing the sport. And so if you disagree with anything that I've said, and I'm sure that there is something that I've said that you do disagree with, please leave that question, leave that statement in the comment section so that we can engage in a discussion about the sport that we both love. I really want to thank you for watching this video. The EA UFC 3 video game is coming out tomorrow, I believe, and so I'll be posting more content on that. I really enjoy those video games. I'll be putting on some online content. Thanks for watching this video, and please stay tuned for more coming up this week.